I am Isabel Hart, 32 years old, living in Boston, Massachusetts, and working as a senior event manager. That morning, just as I poured myself a cup of coffee, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. Only one short line. You don't need to come. This is a 30th anniversary celebration only for family. I froze, my eyes fixed on the screen, then slowly lifted my gaze to the window where the morning light spilled onto the busy streets of the city. In that moment, old memories returned like a wound that had never healed. The Thanksgivings when I stood in the kitchen while they gathered in the living room, the Christmases when I quietly bought gifts for myself, the forgotten birthdays when all attention went to my sister. I sighed and typed slowly. Understood. A short word, without argument, without reproach. But inside, my heart was anything but calm. I had grown used to being pushed aside, but this time would be different. I knew exactly what I had to do. If my own family would not give me a seat at their table, I would build a new table of my own. And this time, when they saw who stood beside me on that stage, the entire room would fall silent. Before I continue with this story, I have a question for you. If one day your own family pushed you away from their table, would you have the courage to build one of your own? I would truly love to hear your thoughts, and don't forget to tell me what time it is where you are watching this story. Thank you so much, my dear. I still remember my childhood vividly in a small suburban town in New Jersey, where rows of red brick houses stood side by side, each with a white fence, neatly trimmed green lawns, and families that seemed almost identical, repeating the same pattern. From the outside, our house looked no different from the rest, but inside, the balance of affection always tilted heavily to one side. I had a younger sister, Brooke Hart, 3 years my junior, and from the moment she was born, the entire world within our family seemed to revolve around her. People called Brooke the precious jewel, not only because she was beautiful, with golden blonde hair and bright blue eyes that looked like something from a commercial, but because my parents cherished her as if she were a gem in their hands. As for me, I was only the shadow, always standing behind her, hearing the unspoken comparisons that weighed so heavily it felt suffocating. I remember my 16th birthday, a milestone for any American teenager. Deep inside, I still held a naive flicker of hope that maybe this year my parents would notice me, that maybe I would finally have a moment that truly belonged to me. I prepared carefully, cutting out pictures of cars and pasting them on my wall, dropping hints to my parents that many of my classmates were receiving big gifts when they turned 16. But that morning, when I walked down to the living room, it wasn't me who was smiling, it was Brooke, beaming in front of a brand new car parked outside with a giant red bow on top. Everyone cheered and celebrated her, while my mother quietly pressed a worn hardback cookbook into my hands, saying she had found it at a discount bookstore. I forced a smile and whispered thanks, but inside, my heart was torn apart. That night, I sat alone in my room, staring out the window at the headlights of my sister's car lighting up the street, while my own gift sat silently on the table, forgotten by everyone. Senior prom was another scar. While Brooke was taken by my mother to shop for designer gowns, trying on dress after dress in upscale boutiques, I had to sew my own dress from a cheap piece of fabric I picked up at a flea market. I stayed up many nights, stitching each seam carefully, both nervous and proud as I watched my creation take shape. All I wanted was for my parents to take at least one picture of me on that important day, the way they had always done for Brooke. But when I stood at the bottom of the stairs, my dress on, my hair curled, there was only silence. My parents said they were busy helping Brooke get ready, and I had to rely on a classmate to pick me up. I left the house without a single family photo, with only the hurried laughter and chatter behind me as they fussed over my sister. Growing up in a household like that, I learned silence. I learned how to hide the hurt, how to step back and give the spotlight entirely to Brooke. I became used to being the afterthought, used to being the backup plan, used to the constant feeling that I was never good enough in my parents' eyes. But those years, painful as they were, quietly forged a resilience in me. I didn't know then that all the times I was excluded, all the times I was dismissed, would later become the fuel I needed to stand firm, To build a world of my own, a world where no one would ever again have the power to erase my name from the guest list. Leaving the house where I had always been seen as a shadow, I stepped into New York carrying a mix of fragility and strength. A few sets of clothes, a student loan, and the single belief that I had to build my life on my own. In those first years at NYU, I didn't live the carefree student life others seemed to enjoy. By day, I attended classes in event management and marketing. By night, I worked shifts as a waitress in small diners, sometimes picking up extra catering jobs at weddings just to afford tuition and rent. I will never forget the feeling of standing backstage in a dazzling ballroom, a heavy tray of wine glasses in my hands, watching elegantly dressed guests smile for photos. I was there, sweat trickling down my back, but at the same time I was learning every detail. How the logistics staff coordinated, how the host handled mishaps, how the band shifted the mood with an unexpected song. I turned every shift into a lesson, so that when I returned to class, I understood my field on a deeper level. There were nights when I stumbled back into my shabby Brooklyn apartment, collapsing onto the bed still in uniform from exhaustion. On snowy days, I walked dozens of blocks just to save a few dollars on bus fare, but I never allowed myself to break. Because no one rolled out a red carpet for me, I was forced to learn how to lay down one for myself. Over time, I realized that success in the event industry was not only about textbook knowledge, but also about resilience under pressure, crisis management, and, above all, understanding people. And through every late-night shift, I became that kind of person. The biggest turning point came when I was offered an internship at a mid-sized event planning company in New York. At first, they only assigned me minor tasks, answering emails, double-checking guest lists, supporting the printing of documents. But I never underestimated the importance of those details. I patiently observed how project directors negotiated with clients, how they stayed calm when the sound system failed in the middle of a ceremony, how they turned a lighting mishap into a memorable moment. Then one day, luck, or perhaps preparation, found me. One of the company's major events in Chicago suddenly lost its project manager due to illness. No one wanted to take the risk. The stakes were too high. I raised my hand. They looked at me, a slim young woman with barely any experience, as if I had lost my mind. But I convinced them that I could handle it, that I understood how to coordinate each moving part, that I had the endurance and the determination not to give up. They reluctantly agreed, perhaps because they had no other choice. And that event changed my life. It was a national-scale conference with thousands of attendees, spanning 3 days at a luxury hotel in Chicago. Every detail carried the potential to become a disaster. From arranging the seating of powerful business leaders, to managing the complex sound and lighting systems, to coordinating a service staff of hundreds. I barely slept during the week of preparation, running from hall to hall, adjusting every nameplate, reminding every staff member of their roles. And when opening night finally came, everything flowed seamlessly. Guests gave endless compliments, the media praised the event, and for the first time, my name was spoken in professional circles. After the Chicago event, I was no longer an anonymous intern. Multiple companies invited me to take on project manager roles, and step by step, I began to build a reputation. I eventually moved to Boston, where the events market was just as vibrant, and over the next 10 years, I founded my own company, Heart Events and Consulting. It started as a small office I rented on Charles Street, staffed with only a handful of eager young employees. But through dedication and credibility, we grew rapidly. I went on to organize everything from lavish weddings for the ultra-wealthy to influential political gatherings, and even art openings that captivated the entire city. The day my company signed its first contract with a major CEO in Boston, I stood in my office, gazing through the glass window at the Charles River flowing gently under the afternoon sunday. I remembered the freezing nights in New York, the endless serving shifts that left me drained, the countless moments watching my sister be celebrated while I silently carried the weight of my own struggles. All of those fragments of my life seemed to converge into that single moment. I knew I had come a long way. I was no longer the forgotten daughter in my family. I was Isabel Hart, founder of Heart Events and Consulting, and my clients were now the very names my parents would look up to with awe. This success did not come from any miracle, but from the old wounds that had shaped me into someone unafraid to stand alone, unafraid to build from nothing. And perhaps, because I had always been placed in the second seat, I learned how to step forward on my own. The message arrived on a Friday afternoon, just as I wrapped up a tense meeting with an important client at the office. I leaned back in my chair, slipped off the high heels that had pinched my feet all day, and unlocked my phone to check the family group chat. That chat was rarely active unless it involved Brooke or my parents. And sure enough, this time was no different. The first image that appeared was a glowing photo of the facade of a luxurious country club in New Jersey, with wrought iron gates curving around immaculate green lawns, and a grand entrance glittering under crystal chandeliers. My father had typed the caption with excitement. "Our 30th wedding anniversary will be held here next month, a private event, family only." Immediately, the family chat exploded with congratulations. Heart emojis, cheerful words of praise for Brooke. "You'll help your parents pick the flowers, right? Brooke, you've always had such great taste," filled the screen. I scrolled through line after line and saw that my name was never mentioned. Then, just minutes later, as their excitement reached its peak, a private message from my mother appeared on my screen. "You don't need to come. This is a 30th anniversary celebration, family only." I sat in silence. My hand clenched the phone, but my face showed nothing. The words "family only" cut through me like a cold blade, slicing past the armor I had spent years building. I thought back to all the times before, Thanksgiving when I was 20, when they told me to stay in my dorm because there wasn't enough space at the table. Christmas when I was 25, when I called home only to hear, "Oh, this year we're eating at Aunt Linda's. It's a bit crowded, so you probably don't need to come." My 30th birthday, when my parents forgot to call me at all, yet still threw Brooke a grand party just weeks later. Each memory was like a scratch on glass, not enough to shatter it instantly, but over the years, the marks piled up until the surface was ready to crack. I remembered the one time I dared to ask my mother directly, "Why am I always the one left out? I'm your daughter too." She gave a thin smile, her tone dismissive. "Brooke needs us more. She's fragile, while you're strong and independent. You'll be fine." Back then, I believed her. I told myself that being strong meant accepting it, meant not needing their affection. But now, staring at the words, "family only," I realized that the strength they assigned to me was nothing more than an excuse to cast me aside, a justification to never share their care or their love. A slow-burning anger rose in my chest, but I refused to let it spill over. I had grown so accustomed to being the outsider that I no longer wanted to waste energy explaining or arguing. They would never listen, they never had, and they never would. I stared at the screen for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, and finally typed a single word. "Understood." I set the phone down and walked to the office window. That Boston evening glowed golden under the fading sun, the Charles River reflecting like a mirror. I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of sorrow and resolve stir within me. For years, I had learned how to stand alone. But this time was different. That message wasn't just another rejection, it was the last straw. I knew this would be the moment I redrew the boundaries. A thought flashed through my mind. If they could host a party to exclude me, then I could host a party too, not to shut anyone out, but to gather everyone who truly valued me. A celebration where, for the first time in my life, I would be the center of the room. A celebration that, when they happened to see or hear of it, would force them to understand that family is not just about blood, but about the people who choose to stay. I allowed a faint smile to curve on my lips, not from joy, but from a growing determination. If they believed I didn't belong at their table, I would prove that I could create another table more magnificent, more filled with people, and more sincere. And when the time came, when they saw who stood beside me on that stage, their room would fall into silence. I returned to Boston that night on a late train, sitting by the window as the streams of highway lights faded into the distance. My mind kept replaying the cold words, "family only," and my own brief reply, "Understood." But instead of letting the sadness consume me, I felt a quiet fire begin to rise inside my chest. When I reached my small apartment near Beacon Hill, I set my bag down, slipped off my coat, and immediately opened my laptop. My fingers moved quickly across the keys, no longer hesitant. I started with the venue. After years of experience in the events industry, this part came to me as naturally as breathing. I didn't want just any space. I wanted somewhere with both capacity and elegance, a place that would leave anyone who walked through the doors impressed. After a few calls and checking the booking schedule, I chose a renowned ballroom in Cambridge, right on the banks of the Charles River, where floor-to-ceiling windows allowed the golden sunset to wash over the entire hall. I had organized events for clients there before, and I knew with the right arrangements, that room could transform into a dazzling evening gala. Next, I opened a new Excel file and typed the words, "guest list." Unlike my parents' so-called family-only celebration, my list was built on an entirely different foundation, not blood, but affection and respect. I typed the names that surfaced in my memory. Samantha, my college roommate, who once split her sandwich with me when we were both broke. The landlords of my first apartment in New York who patiently lowered my rent during a harsh winter. Colleagues who entrusted me with project management when I had little experience. Former clients who not only paid their invoices, but also sent heartfelt thank you notes after every successful event. I even added a few neighbors in Boston, like the one who helped me when I broke my arm on the stairs, or the one who lent me a car when I needed to get to the hospital. The more I wrote, the longer the list became, and the warmer my heart felt. A thought sparked in me. If my parents believed that only they and Brooke counted as family, then I would prove that true family is made up of those who choose to stand by me, even without shared blood. I wanted that when we raised our glasses at the party, the room would overflow with laughter, with eyes filled with pride, and not a single person there would ever think I was merely the shadow of someone else. As the plan began to take shape, I moved on to the concept. I decided on the theme emerald and gold, emerald green to symbolize vitality and resilience, and gold to symbolize brilliance and triumph. I sketched out a mood board, banquet tables draped in deep green silk, golden candles flickering warmly, white flowers woven delicately in between. A live jazz band would play throughout dinner, creating an atmosphere that was both elegant and intimate. The stage would be placed at the very center, so that anyone standing there would be visible to all, leaving no corner for anyone to be overlooked. I called a few of my most trusted vendors, the florist, the lighting crew, the catering team. Each of them reacted with surprise. "Isabel, who's this event for? It sounds incredible." I only smiled and answered, "For someone special." They didn't press further, and I offered nothing more. Keeping the secret was part of the plan. I wanted the evening to land as an unexpected shock, undeniable proof of something greater. That night, close to midnight, I was still sitting alone in front of my laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting off my face. I typed the final line into the plan. Goal: to celebrate true family, those who stayed, supported, and believed. Leaning back in my chair, I exhaled, feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time in a long while, I no longer felt alone. I had an entire list of people who had walked with me through the storms, and they would be the witnesses to the moment I finally stepped into the light. I smiled softly, shut down the screen, and stood up. Outside, Boston lay cloaked in night, its lights scattered like stars across the ground. I knew, from that moment on, the game had changed. And this time, I was the one writing the script. The next day, I dove straight into the details of the party. For someone who had spent years in the events industry, planning a gala was nothing unfamiliar, but this time was different. This wasn't just another professional project, it was a declaration, a moment to prove myself to those who had once dismissed me. I had already chosen the theme, emerald and gold, and slowly, everything began to take shape in my imagination. Long banquet tables draped in deep emerald silk, golden candle holders glowing atop them, Pristine white flower arrangements accented with delicate yellow orchids, soft golden lighting cascading down, reflecting off crystal glasses and silver cutlery, transforming the entire ballroom into a glittering treasure chest. I called a familiar florist in Back Bay and placed an order for hundreds of white roses and yellow orchids, along with lush dark green foliage to highlight the color palette. As I described the vision, the shop manager laughed warmly. "Isabel, this sounds more like a gala for a major charity foundation than a personal party." I replied with a quiet, mysterious smile. "Exactly. That's the point." Music was just as essential. I reached out to a 4-piece jazz band I had once worked with at a book launch. Their warm saxophone notes and tender piano melodies had once brought an entire hall to silence. They were thrilled when I called. "We'll bring a full set classic swing pieces and soft ballads, but who's this event for?" I only shrugged. "Just a small celebration. Trust me, the audience will be worth it." Next came the invitations. I didn't want anything ostentatious, but they couldn't be ordinary either. I commissioned a custom design, an emerald background, gold foil borders, and elegant embossed calligraphy. My name wasn't printed in large letters, just a refined line. "A night of gratitude and celebration. Hosted by Isabel Hart." I sent each envelope to friends, colleagues, and neighbors. When they received them, many called back in curiosity. "Isabel, are you really hosting something like a gala? 200 guests? A live band? Formal gowns?" I smiled softly, my voice firm. "Yes, this will be the night I'll never forget." Alongside the backstage preparations, I also thought about myself. I had spent my whole life standing behind others, but that night I would step into the spotlight. I wanted every detail from the decor to my attire to say one thing. I was no longer the shadow. I met with a designer on Newbury Street and tried on countless gowns. There was a dazzling gold dress, but it felt too loud. A stunning black gown, but it felt too heavy. And then I saw it, a crystal-studded emerald gown with an off-shoulder design that was both soft and strong, a fitted waist that highlighted my figure, and a long sweeping train that glided across the floor. Under the lights, thousands of crystals sparkled like stars. I slipped it on, stood before the mirror, and in that moment, I saw myself not the girl forgotten on her 16th birthday, not the teenager who had to sew her own prom dress, but a woman who had endured, who had become strong enough to shine in her own way. I turned to the designer, smiling. "I'll take this one." In the days leading up to the party, my phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls from friends. "Isabel, what exactly is this event? Why so formal? Are you planning to invite politicians? Will your parents be there?" Each time I heard those questions, I only smiled. I didn't need to explain. My answer was always short and calm. "They'll find out." The night before the party, I stepped into the ballroom for the final check. Staff bustled around, hanging lights, testing the sound system, arranging the tables. On the stage, the Hart Events and Consulting logo glowed across the LED screen under a soft golden wash. I walked between the rows of tables, smoothing a tablecloth here, adjusting a chair there, breathing in the gentle fragrance of fresh flowers. Every detail matched the vision I had carried in my mind. If anything, it was even more beautiful. A picture flickered through my thoughts. Tomorrow, this room would be filled with 200 people, raising their glasses with me, celebrating not just my professional success, but the personal strength that carried me through years of being overlooked. I left the ballroom close to midnight, carrying the box with my emerald gown. That Boston night was crisp, the lights along the Charles River shimmering against the water. Standing on the bridge, the wind brushing lightly through my hair, I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow, I will no longer be the outsider. Tomorrow, I will show them what true family really means." That same evening, 2 celebrations unfolded nearly 300 miles apart. In the New Jersey suburbs, my parents and Brooke hosted their 30th wedding anniversary at a warmly decorated country club. The reception hall held only about 40 guests, mostly close relatives, a few old church friends, and some of my father's longtime colleagues. Round tables covered in white cloths, small vases of red roses set at the center, and a playlist of familiar love songs playing softly through the speakers. I could picture the scene even without being there. Repeated congratulations, recycled stories, every conversation circling back to Brooke, the golden daughter. People would ask her about work, about future plans, and, as always, my name would never be spoken. For them, it would be a family celebration, complete and whole. At the same time, in Boston, I stepped out of the car in front of the Grand Cambridge Ballroom, golden light spilling through the tall glass windows, reflecting across the Charles River like brilliant streaks of stars. I wore the crystal-studded emerald gown, its sweeping train gliding lightly over the red carpet rolled out from the entrance. As the staff opened the doors, a wave of warmth and the soft pull of jazz music poured out, wrapping around me. And when I walked in, the entire room shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers. 200 people, colleagues, mentors, old classmates, clients, neighbors all rose to their feet and broke into thunderous applause. That sound was unlike anything I had ever received from my own family. It was filled with recognition, filled with gratitude. I paused for a moment, letting my eyes sweep across the room. I saw Samantha, the friend who once split her student meal with me, her eyes glistening though her smile was radiant. I saw my former Brooklyn landlords, holding hands and nodding warmly in my direction. I spotted the strict professor who once scolded me for turning in a late assignment, but later wrote the recommendation letter that helped me win a scholarship. And there were my Boston neighbors, the ones who helped me when I fell on the stairs. Every face in that room was a piece of the puzzle, each one a part of what had built the person I had become. The servers moved quickly, pouring champagne into each crystal glass. I stepped onto the stage, my heartbeat steady, deliberate. Under the spotlight, my emerald gown shimmered as though it were dusted with stars. I held the microphone, my voice trembling at first, but as I looked into the loving eyes before me, a calmness spread through me. Raising my glass, I smiled. Thank you all for being here tonight. I know some call this a gala, others think of it as a night of gratitude. For me, this is simply a family dinner. I paused, letting the words sink into the murmurs of the room, then spoke firmly. Because family isn't just about blood. Family is about those who respect and love you, the ones who choose to stand beside you, especially when you have nothing left to give in return. And everyone in this room, you are my true family. The hall erupted in applause, a wave of clapping and cheering that filled the space. I saw a few people wiping away tears. The jazz band immediately lifted the mood with a triumphant melody, the saxophone's long, soaring notes embracing the entire room. In that moment, I felt myself break free from the dark shadow of my childhood. Without my parents, without Brooke, I still had a community whole and unwavering. I was no longer the girl forgotten in the corner of a room. I was the center of a magnificent evening, surrounded by 200 voices affirming my worth. Meanwhile, in New Jersey, my parents and Brooke were no doubt raising their glasses in a small banquet hall, surrounded by the same recycled congratulations. But, here in Boston, I was standing before a sea of light and genuine affection. Two worlds existed at the same time, hundreds of miles apart, yet so starkly opposed they almost felt cruel. And I knew, soon enough, those two worlds would collide, and when they did, they would no longer be able to pretend I was invisible. I tapped my glass lightly against the microphone, signaling for silence once more. My voice rang out, steady and clear. This is my true family. And in that moment, I felt a wide smile spread across my face, not the kind I used to wear to mask the pain, but a smile of release, of confidence, of triumph. As the applause faded, I stood still for a few seconds on the stage, gazing at the familiar faces glowing under the chandeliers. My heart was still racing, but this time for a different reason. I knew the biggest surprise of the evening was still to come. Taking a deep breath, I spoke again, my tone calm but weighted with meaning. Before we begin dinner, I want to introduce a very special guest, someone I had the privilege of working with at an event a few years ago. He placed his trust in me and gave me an opportunity that forever changed my career. Tonight, he is here not as a politician, but as a friend. The ballroom stirred with excitement, curious eyes turning toward the grand doors. As soon as I finished speaking, the doors swung open, and to the gentle strains of music, Massachusetts State Senator David Callahan stepped inside. He wore a sleek gray suit, a small American flag pin gleaming on his lapel. A collective gasp rose from the guests, followed by several people leaping to their feet, and then a wave of thunderous applause filled the hall. I walked down a few steps, shook his hand, and passed him the microphone. He smiled, his voice deep yet clear. "Thank you, Isabel, and thank you all for such a warm welcome. I want to say a few words not as a politician, but as someone who has witnessed her extraordinary determination firsthand." The room fell silent, his words echoing against the walls. 3 years ago, I needed to organize a large-scale fundraising event. Many companies turned me down, saying the timeline was too tight and the demands were impossible. Isabel accepted without hesitation. Within 10 days, she transformed an abandoned warehouse into a magnificent venue, coordinated hundreds of staff, and that night, we raised a record-breaking sum for homeless children. But what impressed me most wasn't just her professionalism, it was the way she led everyone, with calm, with conviction, and with the belief that nothing is impossible. To me, she is the embodiment of resilience and independence. When he finished speaking, a wave of applause erupted, louder and stronger than anything before. I felt a sting rise in my nose, my eyes welling with tears. Not because of reputation or praise, but because for the first time in my life, I stood on a stage, publicly recognized before hundreds of people, all for what I had built with my own hands, without leaning on anyone, without asking for anyone's permission. I took the microphone, my voice trembling slightly but still clear. "Thank you, Senator, and thank you, everyone. If one day my parents ever see this, I only hope they understand one thing. I have never been without family. I was only without them." The moment the words left my lips, the room burst into cheers. Many people stood, raising their champagne glasses high, and together they shouted, "To Isabel." I looked around, seeing radiant faces, some wiping away tears, others clasping my hands tightly as I stepped down from the stage. In that moment, it felt as though every wound from my childhood, every abandonment, every moment of humiliation, had been soothed by the overflowing love in that room. The music swelled again, jazz notes flowing through the air as guests returned to their tables in high spirits. I sat down surrounded by friends and colleagues, a strange peace settling over me. In my mind, a quiet thought emerged. In New Jersey, at that very moment, my parents and Brooke were likely raising their glasses in a small hall, repeating the same tired blessings. They thought that was family only. But here, under golden lights and among 200 genuine souls, I finally understood what family truly meant. And I knew it was only a matter of time before they would be forced to face that truth. The next morning, I had just set my coffee down on my desk at the office when my phone began buzzing nonstop. Looking up, I noticed a few of the younger staff whispering as they glanced at their screens, some even turning toward me with excited smiles. I opened my laptop. Images from last night's party were everywhere on Twitter and Instagram. The hashtags number a night with Isabel and number Emerald and Gold Gala had suddenly gone viral in Boston, even trending across the entire state of Massachusetts. A short video clip of Senator Callahan standing beside me on stage, praising my resilience and independence, had been shared thousands of times within just a few hours. Online headlines blared. Boston entrepreneur turns night of gratitude into dazzling gala. Senator hails Isabel Hart as a symbol of a new generation. Scrolling further, pride swelled in me, but so did a restless tension. Because I knew once something hit the internet, it wasn't just Boston that would see it. And just as I expected, my family group chat soon lit up with notifications. One relative, whether by accident or intention, had forwarded a news photo into the group. It showed me on stage in the emerald gown, chandeliers sparkling above, Senator Callahan at my side, with the caption, Isabel Hart hosts Grand Gala in Cambridge, over 200 guests in attendance. I stared at the screen without typing a word. Inside, I felt a bitter mix of amusement and irony, so it took seeing me in the headlines for them to suddenly remember I existed. By noon, as I was reviewing a contract for a new client, the office door suddenly swung open. I looked up, and my chest tightened. My parents stood there, their faces heavy, and behind them was Brooke. The staff froze, pretending to focus on their screens, but I could feel their eyes darting toward us, curious and tense. The air thickened, the temperature in the room seeming to drop. I rose slowly to my feet, my voice calm. "Hello, Dad. Mom. And hello, Brooke." My mother spoke first, her voice strained but attempting composure. "Last night, what was that, Isabel?" I held her gaze, unblinking. "A family celebration." I paused for a beat, then emphasized each word. "A real family." All three of them stiffened at once. My father frowned, his lips twitching as though he couldn't believe his ears. "Real family? What do you mean?" "We just celebrated our 30th anniversary. That was family." I gave a faint smile. "Really? A party where I was told in a private message, you don't need to come. A lifetime of meals where I was always left out. If that's what you call family, then I'd rather have none." Brooke, who had remained silent until then, widened her eyes at me as if she were seeing me for the first time, not the sister who had always endured, always yielded. Her voice faltered. I didn't think it was that serious." I turned to her, my eyes cold. "Of course you didn't. You've never had to sit on the sidelines, you never got an old book while someone else got a car. You never had to sew your prom dress while mom took you shopping at high-end boutiques. You never had to take out loans just to go to college while your tuition was paid in full. You could never think of it, Brooke. Because you've always been the center of everything, and I was only the shadow." All. The tension in the room thickened. I gestured lightly for my staff to step out, and the door closed behind them, leaving only me, my parents, and Brooke seated around the polished wooden table. Suddenly the space felt smaller, heavier, as if the air itself had thinned. My father laced his fingers together, resting them on the table, his eyes avoiding mine, though his voice was rigid. "You don't understand, Isabel, we just wanted a small private dinner. 30 years of marriage doesn't need to be extravagant, just those closest to us." A sharp laugh escaped me, but it held no humor, only bitterness. "Small? Or exclusion? You know perfectly well that all my life, I've been placed on the outside. Every important moment, Brooke was at the center while I was left standing at the edge, looking in. The anniversary dinner was no different. You didn't want me there, yet you had the nerve to call that family." I knew. My mother's brows furrowed, her voice rising. "Isabel, you're blowing this out of proportion. We never meant any harm. It's just, you've always been stronger, you didn't need the same care as Brooke. Your sister is more fragile, more sensitive. We thought." I cut her off, my voice sharp, cold as ice. "No, Mom. That's the excuse you tell yourselves. Did I not need it, or did you never want to give it? When I fell, I had to pick myself up. When I longed for a little recognition, you told me I was strong enough not to need it. In all these years, did either of you ever stop to wonder if I was truly okay?" No one answered. Brooke sat beside them, her hands tightly clasped together, eyes fixed on the floor. For the first time, I saw her face stripped of its usual pride, replaced only with confusion. I looked directly at her, my voice slow and deliberate. "Did you ever realize? Every gift, every opportunity, every ounce of favor, always went to you. And I had nothing. Did you ever see me standing in the background, swallowing back tears, while the whole family cheered for you?" Brooke stayed silent for a long time. I almost believed she would say nothing, just like always. But then, in a choked whisper, she said, I never thought it was that heavy. I just assumed you didn't care. I thought you were fine." She lifted her head, eyes rimmed red though no tears fell. "Maybe I was selfish. I thought I was only following what mom and dad wanted, without realizing how much it weighed on you. That admission, though not a full apology, sent a tremor through the room. I couldn't decide whether to feel relieved or wounded. Part of me wanted to shout, "Yes, you were selfish," but another part only felt tired. I answered simply, "I've waited years to hear something like that." My father exhaled deeply, leaning back into his chair, his aging eyes carrying a glimmer of something like regret, though still clouded by stubbornness. In a low voice, he said, "Maybe. We didn't see it. We were too focused on Brooke, and we thought you'd be fine on your own. But Isabel, you have to understand, being a parent, no one gets it perfect." I nodded slightly. "I understand. But there's something I need you to understand too. Neglect can kill the child inside, even if on the outside she looks strong. I've lived with that feeling my whole life." The room sank into silence. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, each second stretching thin. My mother turned her face away, her hands trembling. Brooke lowered her head, her blonde hair falling to hide half her face. My father opened his mouth as if to say more, but then pressed his lips shut. For the first time, they had no defense left. Strangely, that silence no longer suffocated me. Instead, it felt like a mirror. I saw the truth. All those years I had longed to hear them acknowledge me, but when the moment finally drew close, I felt only emptiness. No explanation, no excuse could ever bridge the gap of decades. And the only thing left between us. I rose, gathering the unfinished file in front of me, my voice calm. "I don't need any more words. I just want you to see clearly that I am no longer standing on the outside. I have found my true family, whether you are part of it or not." My hand rested on the back of the chair as I looked at them one last time. "If that makes you uncomfortable, I'm sorry, but it's the truth." I walked out of the conference room, my heels striking firmly against the wooden floor of the hallway. Behind me, the door closed, sealing in the heavy silence of my parents and Brooke. I did not look back. For years, I had lived craving their recognition, but today I realized I no longer needed it. Last night, I had stood in a room overflowing with recognition, and ahead of me was an entire future I had built with my own hands. That evening, I drove back to my small apartment in Beacon Hill. The late sunlight spilled across the red rooftops, casting a golden glow on the uneven brick-paved streets. When I opened the door, I drew in a deep breath, letting the familiar scent of home fill my chest. Everything was quiet: the neatly arranged bookshelf, the desk stacked with unfinished files, the sofa draped with a hand-woven blanket. I hung up my coat, set my bag down, and sat at the desk. In front of me lay a worn brown leather journal, the place where I had recorded everything that mattered, from work ideas to wounds too heavy to speak aloud. I turned to a fresh page and picked up my pen. The nib trembled slightly in my hand, but the words came out steady. "I don't need to chase love in places that have denied me. I will build it in places where it is welcomed." When I finished, I stared at the line for a long time. It wasn't just a statement, it was a promise to myself. A promise that I would stop seeking recognition from those who would never give it, and instead, create new bonds that were warm and enduring. Closing the journal, I stood, poured myself a cup of hot tea, and stepped out onto the balcony. Boston was already glowing with evening lights. Glass towers reflected the shimmer, and the Charles River stretched like a dark mirror scattered with countless points of light. I stood there, sipping the tea, feeling the warmth spread through my body. In that moment, I knew with clarity that I had crossed into a new chapter of my life. I thought about the emerald and gold gala, about the thunderous applause, about the faces that had stood with me not out of obligation, not out of blood ties, but out of genuine love. I thought about the final words I spoke on stage, and I knew they were true. Family is not who gives you life. Family is who chooses to stay. I turned toward the window and caught my own faint reflection in the glass. In those eyes, there was no longer the confusion of a child abandoned, but the resolve of a woman who had discovered her own worth. I smiled softly, and in my heart whispered a message not only for myself, but for anyone listening to this story. Family is not who gives you life. Family is who chooses to stay. And if you've ever been cast aside, remember this: you have the right to build a table of your own. Beavis. Outside, Boston glittered like a sky full of stars. I took another sip of tea, letting the warmth spread through me, and I knew from that moment on, I would move forward not as someone excluded, but as someone who had created her own seat at the table.